Religion then has to have the two-headed phallus here. This was Zoroaster's point. And Judaism kept it. It kept it also in the separation of the volcanic god, Jehovah. God in Hebrew is always in pluralis. Elohim. Plato and the Republic, we had again the worship of the one phallus. So that's the philosopher king, which is Plato's attempt at merging the logos and the pathos into one guy, as if it would be one and the same guy, the most muscles and the biggest stick and the biggest brain at the same time. The problem with Confucianism in China, that also goes for the one phallus. And it creates a state bureaucracy, the Chinese version of empire, still until this day with Xi Jinping. The step from the Sutra to the Tantra is the step from being an adult and being an honorable member of the tribe. You might get invited to go into the Tantric realm. We had a journey from brilliant religion. If technology went up for the last 5,000 years, religion went down. And therefore, you must make a comparative study of the Silk Road Triad and the brilliance of Buddhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and we can include Judaism on the side too. And then compare it to what America on its own created in terms of theology in the last 300 years, which I call the Disney World Triad of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and finally Scientology. It is so fucking shitty. Like an old woman comes up to you and smacks you in the face and tells you, you're nothing without me because you don't have knowledge. You don't have the gnosis. You're just energy. You don't have to know. If I send you out in the wilderness on your own, you're dead within 400 meters. You know, a leopard will come and cut your throat off. Phallus is split. It's a two-headed phallus. It's unthinkable that could be just one phallus.
Welcome back to the Gnostic Informant, and you are about to attain true gnosis. And I'm with Alexander Barr today, who is returning now for the second time on this channel. The first time we were talking about this Silk Road tradition, how it the tradition, how it passed through Zoroaster and all these great traditions, the Tao, the Zoroastrians, and the
Buddhism, of course.
Buddhism, right? And so there's another aspect that people don't talk about as much, and it's the phallic side of things. Some people call it Dionysian, some people call it Priapus, Hermes, this type of mythology that's there. But what's behind it? There's a reason why it's there.
Okay, so the Silk Road Triad, or we could even call it the quartet if we include Judaism. But say it's Zoroastrianism, which is the Persian Tantra, Buddhism, which is originally the Indian Tantra, and Taoism as the Chinese Tantra. The reason why we're so interested in these religions or these school spiritualities because they will survive. I've long predicted that we're seeing the end of Christianity, and we're probably going to see the secularization and the end of Islam as well pretty soon, because those religions are no longer credible. They're pop religions. They're based on beliefs like the afterlife and the resurrection, things we no longer believe in. So they're like empty, dead religion, rituals without meaning. And the question then is, what was it about the older religions in the West, that's Zoroastrianism in Persia and Judaism coming out of Palestine? Or was it about those religions? What are those qualities that those religions have? They're obviously a lot cooler than Christianity and Islam. They don't count the souls they can win before they go to heaven or anything like that. It's actually hard to convert to Zoroastrianism and Judaism. You have to make a real effort. Probably because these are schools of truth and not schools of popularity. So that's exactly why we started this discussion by talking about the Silk Road Triad and why I'm so interested in it, and why I think also Buddhism will come to the West in a massive way, followed by Taoism and Zoroastrianism, because in the West, we now have to acknowledge that while we tried to pursue philosophy in the West, the East was totally superior when it comes to religion and spirituality, and took it far more seriously than we did. And we can also go back, of course, to, like you do in your work, you can go back to Greek and Roman paganism and try to see what you can find there. This was, of course, what Nietzsche did. Right. You can also do what Freud did. And Freud took the proper Jewish stance against Christianity. And he attacked Christianity for this one thing. It avoids the question of sexuality. Just look at the Christ figure. I mean, the guy is born a god. His mother became pregnant with an angel. He's then without any sign of him jerking off or fucking anything. He goes all the way to the cross, and then he dies on the cross with his mother by his side. It's an absolute avoidance of sexuality, like if sexuality did not exist. And this has always been the Jewish critique of Christianity.
And why does he get baptized if he's perfect and sinless and he never had any sin? You know what I mean? Like, what was the point?
Yeah.
So sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it's like the baptism is there because he didn't take his own virginity.
Right.
Like there wasn't a move into adulthood. So instead we have a baptism. Like if John the Baptist baptizing him rather than fucking him in the ass would be his entrance towards adulthood.
And it's kind of an initiation thing too, if you think about it too. So
yeah, exactly. That's what it is. Well, where's the initiation? Okay. So the real question here, if you're going to do a proper theory, is to go to Freud, for example, that look at what is it ultimately that's timeless about us as sexual beings. And here's where the phallus comes into the picture. The great thing is that we have 3 genital organs, out of which 2 are on the female body. And the third one is on the male body. The 2 genital organs on the female body is the matrix, out of which we came when we were born. And it's essentially a void. We lived in paradise. We will never return there again. We came out of 9 months in paradise, which was essentially a morphine tent called the womb. We call that the matrix in psychoanalysis. And then when we're born, that's basically for the mother to realize that mother and child are separate. The child doesn't get that. The first thing we do when we're born is that we crawl up to the tit, put the tit inside our mouth, and that's what we call the mamella in psychoanalysis. And whenever we look back at something, we try to find something to put inside of our mouths and escaping reality. We always go for the mamella. For example, if you're an opiate abuser, the opium has become your mamella, and it makes you incapable of living life fully because you're just looking for the next opium fix. And that's exactly what a baby does when it sucks the tit. Now, when we suck the tit, we feel united with the mother again. We don't have to exist as our own entity. We're not alone. Actually, we don't exist at all as a subject. So there has to be a point somewhere where we leave the mamilla. And one of the things that Freud and Lacan didn't get, but later Julia Kristeva, a fantastic female psychoanalyst, discovered, was that we always believed that the mother pushed away the child. But that's not really what happens. The mother can't push away the child. She never will. No, the child has to figure out for itself that it needs to get away from the mamilla. For practical reasons, and nothing else, because you got teeth in your mouth, and it's hard to suck the tit when you got teeth in your mouth. So psychologists, psychoanalysts, they all agree there has to be a split where the child gets this first reaction out. No, I don't want the tit any longer. I want it away. I want it away. I want something else. And this is what's called the phallic intrusion in psychoanalysis. So it's essentially a bit like your dad walks by with a dick. It's a big dick. It's a grown-up dick. You don't have it, or you can't have it if you're a girl. So that's the Oedipus or the Electra complex. The mother gets something that you can't have, and the mother's attracted to something that you don't have. So the boy wants to have that dick, or the girl wants to have that dick in her. And because of that, they need to get away from the mother. And this is the Oedipus and the Electra complex. And it happens at about 1 year of age or something like that. But that's formally when the child discovers it's its own entity, separate from the mother. There's probably some kind of experience before that. Lacan speculates that there must be some experience where the mother's body leaves a room and the baby's body is left in the room. And the baby realized that something just left the room, which was mother as everything. And there's something left in the room that isn't mother. Non-mother. There's non-mother here, right? And then later at the phallic intrusion, the child discovers that this non-mother, which is the child, has competitions from another non-mother, which we later call the father, which is the phallus. So your entire childhood is this journey where you push away the mamilla. You actually learn how to hate for the first time in your life. The one thing you loved the most, the one thing you will ever love the most, mamilla, is something you push away from you and you turn from love towards hatred. You have to learn how to hate to get rid of something in your life that you've grown away from. And this hatred towards the mamilla is, according to Julia Kristeva, the beginning of childhood. and of your own journey towards your own individuality and your subjectivity. And then the whole childhood is like your parents still support you. Hello, mamala. But you're striving towards becoming an adult, phallic. And this journey means that you play around, you mimic the parents. You mimic them intensely. Like everything you play when you're a child, you play, you're a parent. And whenever you want to play something and you fail, but you want to try again, you just tell your parents, no, I want to do it myself. Don't help me. I want to do it myself.
Right.
And that means the Oedipus and Declan complex has worked. Every time a kid says, no, I want to do it myself, that means the complex has worked.
Yeah.
You're eager to figure this out for yourself. And then, of course, the phallus is there in the distance. And it says human beings are on journeys all the time. We're nomadic. You know how my work is always about how we're nomadic. We have to migrate. We have to travel, especially in time, not just in space, but in time. And this is the journey towards the phallus. And then when you become a teenager, there's the rebellion against the phallus. That's a teenage rebellion. You have to traverse the phallic fantasy. You have to get beyond the phallus, which means you rebel against the phallus. You rebel against your grown-ups. You declare your parents to be divine, and then you attack the parents. And then it turns out they're human. And that means you stay divine for a little while less until your narcissism kills it for you. You have to accept that you're a human as well. And this is the process that has to be completed. This is the process we will lack in contemporary culture because we stay kids for too long. We delay the teenage rebellion and we don't fulfill it. And that's why we end up with enormous amounts of narcissism we have in our culture today.
Yeah.
So phallus theory is in principle a theory about how we grow up, rebel against the phallus, and then become phallic ourselves. As men, we have phallus, we have a dick. As a woman, your entire body becomes phallic. The female body is phallic. But the phallus inside the matrix is the return to a father does what he did to mother, so the whole process can be repeated. But you're not ready to fuck. You're not ready to go into the sexual act unless this entire process is finished. And once that's finished, you're through with it. That's why actually jerking off when you're a teenager signs that you want to get through with it. You want to have a rebellion against the phallus to then become a full grown-up.
Wow. And so what I noticed about the Greeks in particular when it comes to this is when they like when these playwrights, people like Aeschylus or I don't know, Hesiod, people, whoever, I'm just throwing names out there, when they construct these verses basically, and they're like characterizing these gods, they're injecting wisdom within this text. It's not just, these aren't just stories. They aren't just like, especially like when you look at like Aesop, for example, he's really just, this is wisdom right here. And it makes you wonder with a character like Priapus, who's the son of Dionysus, or Hermes in the same way, what is the because the Christians look at this and they're like, oh my God, this is horrible. Burn it down, get rid of it, trash it. They don't understand it. They're horrified by this stuff. I'm reading some of these 4th century manuscripts and they're burning down libraries and they can't handle it. They're like, what is all this stuff? This is the devil. But they're wrong. There's something to this thing.
Yeah. So in paganism, the phallus is included, right? And that's because paganism has its roots in what we call nomodology. So think of nomodology as the religion. Nomodology is the religion that for logical reasons have to make a tribe move. Everything is about nomadism. Everybody's about having a mythos where you get the entire tribe up in the morning so they can start walking.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So if they don't walk, they die. So what you do is that you have to create a narrative here. And here's the interesting thing. For a tribe to survive in an evolutionary environment, it has to optimize its chances of survival and be as strong as possible when going into competition with other tribes. That makes sense, right? Because for millions of years, there was a limited number of people on the planet. All they could do was hunt and gather. And in between that, they went to war. And to win a war against another tribe, the tribe in itself had to optimize its chances of survival. That means the narrative has to be adjusted to that. That means there's a general religion among the original tribes, regardless of where you are in the world. And what we've done in our work, John said it is nice, that we've seen this pattern pop up just about everywhere. So think of it like a pre-pagan religion. And that's called nomodology. And the nomodology is based on leadership and authority. Like the thing you do in any nomadic tribe is that you go through a rite of passage. It knocks your ego out. And the thing you do after you're through with the rite of passage is that you submit to the tribe. Like an old woman comes up to you and smacks you in the face and tells you, you're nothing without me because you don't have knowledge. You don't have the gnosis. You're just energy. You don't have to know. If I send you out in the wilderness on your own, you're dead within 400 meters. A leopard will come and cut your throat off because you don't know what you're doing. You have no knowledge. I have knowledge because I've lived an entire life, and my own longevity is evidence of that. So this is the power of the elders. And then when you look at the leadership itself, what's interesting is that you probably put the oldest woman at the end of the tribe when they walk. If she can walk, anybody could walk. She's the oldest woman in the tribe. If you're behind her, you're dead. And that's why in all mythology, behind the matriarch, there's nothing but chaos. Okay? No point in going there. There's always a chaos goddess behind the matriarch. In front of the matriarch, you're okay. So just walk in front of her and you're fine. And probably women and children walk ahead of her, and then the men walk ahead of them. And then ahead of the men is the phallic leadership. And here's the brilliance of nomodology. The phallic leadership has to absolutely optimize the male leadership that leads. And the male leadership that leads is that they fight the enemy, they spy on the enemy, but they also figure out where to go. They have the vision and they have the strategy. And these are all classic phallic qualities. And if you then boil them down to the absolute experts here, what makes sense is that the phallus must be split. It must be two-headed. There must both be a priest and a chief, where the priest is the master of the mind and the chief is the master of the matter or the body. I mean, if you look at man as a whole, if you look at the leadership you're looking for among men, you'd find one guy who's the strongest guy, the greatest warrior. And you'd find one guy who's the smartest guy. He represents the intelligence and the knowledge, the gnosis that you're looking for, right? So that's the priest, the chief. So in any tribe, you would split these two characters. You would make them two different leaders. You would need a two-headed phallus to walk ahead and be successful. For example, if you look at, we now call this exodology because exodology is when you go back to the nomadic because you have to leave a certain culture or a certain paradigm to walk into the new. The perfect example of this, of course, the Hebrews leaving Egypt. Now, please note that the way the exodology was described before the temporary nomadism set in and the 40 years in the desert, there were three siblings in the final version of the Exodus: Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. This is exactly the pattern I'm talking about. Aaron clearly takes on the role of the chief. He leads the people all the way into the promised land. The priest is Moses. He's the law. He dies before they enter the promised land because he reminds everybody that for him as a priest, the journey itself was the whole point. He just led them out of the old paradigm into the new paradigm. And the third sibling is the sister, Miriam. And she walks at the end of the Exodus. Like if you're behind her, that's Egypt. That's chaos. You don't want to be there. Ahead of her, you're a Hebrew. You're part of the new. You're the chosen ones.
Yeah.
And therefore you walk ahead of her, led by Moses and Aaron. That's essentially the pattern you discover all the time. It's Vishnu, Shiva, and Shakti in Hinduism. So you discover this pattern constantly of the two-headed phallus that leads and the matriarch at the end.
Yeah.
So the matriarch is just one person. You can have tyranny in the sense that there's only one person deciding everything at the end because it's basically a symbolic position. It's a mythical position. But at the front, where knowledge is everything and power is everything, you need the two-headed phallus. Now, this is then repeated in all religion.
Yeah,
it stays, for example, in Zoroastrianism. It stays in all religion until we arrive at the axial age and enormous amounts of affluence. 800 before Christ.
And you see this with the Romans. They have they had this triple priesthood where you have your Vestal virgins led by a matriarch, and then you have the priest of Mars. He's leading all the legions and the generals. That's the army cult. And then you have the Pontifex Maximus, who leads the augurs, who is the basically the priesthood of Jupiter Optimus Maximus, the Most High God. you had this tripart system. And I think this goes back to Babylon as well. You have the same system where there's a high priest and then there's a king. The king is in charge of all the armies, and he's got the body, the matter, like you said. He's got the physical arms, the weapons. But the priesthood, he's in charge of the philosophy, the theology, the myths, all that stuff. And that's what really keeps everything together.
Yes. So even in Christianity, because nobody ever worshipped the Holy Spirit. You had the Father, the Son, and the Spirit. No. Practiced folk Christianity is always the Father, the Son, and the Mother. This Virgin Mary and the baby Jesus. At least they got that. The Trinity was necessary because the Trinity is always there. But the Trinity essentially is the two-headed phallus and the matriarch. That's the pattern that's repeated. So if you look at the two-headed phallus, essentially it's the sun god and the rain god in most religions. So the sun god maintains the sky and keeps up the sky, so it doesn't fall down, right? So there's a sky over the earth, of course, being motherly, matriarch, the people. And then the other god is the rain god, the fertility god. And then when you start looking at what the fertility god or the rain god ends up, that's war, that's king, chief, right? And the sun god is, of course, often takes out one of his eyes to be even wiser, but be less of a fighter. That's a sun god. And the sun god, be repeated in all pagan religion, essentially, is his other god. So at least the phallus is split. There's a two-headed phallus. It's unthinkable there could be just one phallus. It's unthinkable because no nomadic tribe could ever survive with just having one phallus. But the dream about having one phallus occurs specifically in the axial age because we have so much affluence. And of course, we have a rich culture because of it. We have, both Asia and in Europe and the Middle East explode with thinking and creativity and all that. And there's a lot of goodies coming out of the axial age. But when it comes to philosophy here, the problem is that you end up with siding with either one of the two heads of the phallus. This is dualism. So everything was monist until then. But here dualism arrives. And with dualism, you get the idea that you could either side with the mind and then declare the matter to be evil, or you can side with the matter and declare the mind to be evil. So it comes out of this, there's a fight between the logos and the pathos here, where you either declare the pathos is everything. What I feel is the truth. I don't care how you think or what you say. I don't care about it at all. I'm just going to go for the pathos. I'm going to go for the feeling. And therefore, I must kill the priest and have only the king left. Or you go the other way. You say that, no. This world is evil. It's nasty. We are above this world. We're more noble than this world. Therefore, we deny our sexuality. We deny everything beneath our throat, and therefore we are minds only. And because we're minds only, this is mani and manichism. Like we're minds only.
Castration,
Exactly.
the Cabellian way.
Yeah. And of course, here's the problem. You either get a pillar saint, which is a priest who therefore doesn't become an adult priest because he's a priest without his king. Or you become a boy pharaoh. We use the term boy pharaoh because this, of course, happened first in Egypt, right, where all the physical resources are everything to you and physical accumulation is everything to you. And you deny that the mind can do any job at all. You basically hate people who can think better than you do, and you just want to kill them. And these are the two patterns we've seen when things go terribly wrong in history since then. The problem we have is not patriarchy. No, patriarchy is wonderful when it works, just like we're lacking a functioning matriarchy today. Matriarchy is just older women teaching young women how to behave. Patriarchy is older men teaching young men to be wise and not stupid. But the problem is that when the patriarchy becomes a parody, because it's either run by a pillar saint or it's run by a boy pharaoh, we go wrong. Right. And the funny thing with Zoroaster, 1700 years before Christ, before Akhenaten in Egypt, by the way, and things started going really wrong, he realized that I will keep the two-headed phallus. I will keep that function. Because if I want to go from tribe towards empire, he was the first imperial philosopher. He wanted to create a court religion of an empire, which is called Zoroastrianism. He said that you have to keep the split phallus. He didn't even think about the phallus being one thing. It was unthinkable. But he warned about people who might think that way. And already in the Gathas, about 1,000 years before the axial age, Zoroaster explicitly warns us now, watch out for those guys who walk out and put themselves on a pillar in the woods and declare the world is evil, because these are the guys with small dicks who hate sex, because they envy the guys who fuck. And therefore, they would declare that their minds are superior to their bodies. Hey, Manichaeism, right? So,
yeah, Gnostic.
so Zoroaster insisted on monism. And when Zoroastrianism took its last fight against Islam, it had its fights against Christianity before that. It was always an ally with Judaism. There's not a single recorded conflict between Zoroastrianism and Judaism. Actually, Judaism grew out of Zoroastrianism. It was originally an Egyptian sect adopted by the Persians, but therefore, through its Persian influence, became a fully grown-up adult religion.
And that's who the Pharisees were. They were, and the Pharisees are the first real philosophical sect of Judaism that came out of Persia, where you get John Hyrcanus and his son, the second. They're literally like, they're the first like real, I would say, like well put together theology, like real, like thought through theology. That's like how do I say this? It's not like scattered all over the place and you got to find some pieces here. They had it all in one spot, like that. They really were doing it right.
Yeah, and the Sadducees, who are often portrayed as enemies of the Pharisees, I hardly doubt that. The Sadducees was a priestly cult on its own, like a religion within the religion, exactly like in Zoroastrianism. There it's called Zoroastrianism. And they had their own religion within the religion, and it was incredibly cosmopolitan. And the Sadducees just told the Jews that we are part of the Hellenistic world. We have no problem with the Persians at all. Actually, we are the Persians' great favorites, because the Persians have invented empire. And after the Phoenicians and the Hebrews, who were essentially the same people, the Phoenicians just got on the boats, like Norwegians do, and the Hebrews stayed and tried to farm, which like Swedes do. So a bit like Swedes and Norwegians, that was the Phoenicians and the Hebrews. And the Hebrews and the Phoenicians invented an alphabet about 800 before Christ that made it possible for you to construct a national language.
Right.
So they created uniquely a nation that was also a religion.
Yeah.
As Judaism. And that's exactly where anti-Semitism is always based on nation envy, because the Jews invented the perfect nation that no other culture, at least in the West, possibly Japan in the East, but no other culture has managed to create a nation that is also a religion. The Japanese and the Jews are the only ones that did that. And precisely because they did that, which the Persians celebrated, they were the perfect nation within the Persian Empire.
Yeah, I agree.
And later they were, of course, the perfect nation within the Roman Empire, which, of course, why the Jews went after Christ, who declared they was going to go universal and try to conquer the Roman Empire with his dualist ideas about the mind superior to the body. It's very, very clear when you see about the Sadducees thought that Christ would destroy a fantastic construct, which was the empire and the nation within the empire. And that's why the New Testament is full of lies.
It's actually,
if you look at the historical facts at the time when Christ was born, it's just turned topsy-turvy, upside down compared to what it actually was.
Yeah, he's actually technically, by definition, an antichrist.
Yes, he is.
Yeah,
he is.
I mean, that's
his ego is way bigger than the interest of the Jewish nation. That's exactly why they execute him.
I mean,
and this, of course, the dirty secret still in the conflict between Judaism and Christianity is that the Jews thought it was the right thing to do to execute Christ. And later, the Zoroastrians imitated the Jews when they executed first Mani in the 3rd century and the later Malstak 200 years later. They did it for exactly the same thing. These guys that are dualists and declare either the mind to be superior to the body or the body to be superior to the mind are incredibly dangerous. This, of course, what the Zoroastrians were always opposed to Christianity and Islam, because Christianity and Islam took these ideas seriously. And what happened was that Christianity developed as the ultimate pillar saint religion, and Islam developed as the ultimate boy pharaoh religion.
Yeah.
And the inheritors of the Islamic heritage that we see in our world today are, guys like Hitler, Putin, Mao, Pol Pot, boy pharaohs, all of them. Muhammad was a boy pharaoh. He was incredibly, mercilessly violent. He just killed. He went on the jihad literally and killed. And that's why he was successfully expanded. And the only time he got a proper response that Islam was put to its proper size in a way was when the Mongols invaded. And what the Mongols did was that they had another religion with just one phallus, Tengrism, and then just the earth.
Yeah. And it's now, okay, I wanted to ask you about because you have this brilliant way of describing logos, mythos, and pathos. But you just brought up something that I want to touch on. Where would you rank Tengranism in this compared to the boy pharaoh and the pillar saint thing? Is that a boy pharaoh religion in your opinion?
It's a good question. The problem here is that it's just one phallus. So logos and pathos are the two domains of the phallus. Logos is, of course, the priest. Pathos is, of course, the chief. So, and then mythos is with the matriarch and with the people. And logos and pathos can only be unified in the mythos. That's why there's sexual attraction. Okay. When you put your penis inside a vagina, you feel united with a whole, at least for a while. And that's why you need to return to it, because as soon as you pull it out, you're back in the logos pathos dichotomy. And that's what women find fascinating with men. They love the drama that goes on in the man's mind, the conflict between his mind and his body, and we tries to work on both of them, and they're never unified. That's exactly what this sexual attraction towards woman. Woman, though, feels whole, she's mythical. The problem with being mythical, though, is that it's a lot harder to separate fact from fiction. Since fact is with the priest, and fiction here is with the chief, from the female perspective. So this is what women struggle with all the time. They can hold both balls in their two hands at the same time in a way, but if they drop one of them, they have to drop the other one too. That's the problem with the mythical. The mythical is always trying to be both logos and pathos at the same time, and it therefore has to compromise both on the logos and compromise on the pathos to stay in the mythos. But we cannot tell a story to each other that motivate each other without the mythos. For example, if there's a war going on and you send the news and you show pictures how bloody it is and how cruel your enemy is and things like that, that's pathos. And then the logos is the mathematical. It's just like, here's the weapons, here's the ammunition, here's how many soldiers you have, we're going to go to war. None of those two things can motivate a single soldier to go out under a flag and fight. You need a mythos for that. And that's what the priest steps in almost like the priest has almost an androgynous quality to him when he steps in, and he then declares the mythos that we are a united people, and all the men of this tribe have to go from just providing to also now protecting. We have to go to war, and we have to win this war, and the women have to back up all the men and celebrate them, because otherwise the women and the children will also be killed. So that's the mythos of war. And then you have to make a really good narrative about it, and then you have to go to war, because only the mythos can put the troops on fire and be willing to fight. And this is where we always stuck with the mythos, that we cannot get out of the logos pathos divide unless there's a mythos. So there's always a triad here. It's constantly repeating. Hegel, Lacan, all these guys, they work with these triad all the time. The fundamental narratological triad. The narratology is the three narratives together and how they're dialectically related to one another. And this we have to go through all the time and stay with it. So religion then has to have the two-headed phallus here. This was Zoroaster's point. And Judaism kept it. It kept it also in the separation of the volcanic god Jehovah and the Adonai, which is, of course, originally Aton, coming out of Egypt, by having two names for God. God in Hebrew is always in pluralis. Elohim.
Elohim, yep.
Elohim. So Judaism keeps the pluralis inside the phallus. Zoroastrianism keeps the pluralis inside the phallus. The problem in China was that China made the same mistake as it did in Europe, because with Plato and the Republic, we had again the worship of the one phallus. Okay, so that's the philosopher king, which is Plato's attempt at merging the logos and the pathos into one guy. And that will be the perfect tyrant, because the perfect tyrant would then be both logos and pathos at the same time, as if it would be one and the same guy, had the most muscles and the biggest stick and the biggest brain at the same time. Not very likely, right? It's always a very boyish, infantile dream. It's often the boy who dreams about it that thinks he's going to be this guy himself. The problem with Confucianism in China, that also goes for the one phallus. And it creates a state bureaucracy, the Chinese version of empire, still until this day with Xi Jinping. The Chinese version of empire is just one guy at the top. Xi Jinping is just a boy pharaoh. That's the problem. Because it's essentially, the problem is repeated even in Nietzsche, even if he senses that there's something wrong with this, but he calls it will to power. And the will to power is how you lead a nomadic tribe forward into the future, or you lead your chosen people into the new paradigm. Doesn't matter. You got to separate the will to power. There are two different wills if you're phallic. There's the will to intelligence, which is the will to knowledge, which is the will to gnosis. This is the priest. The priest then accumulates all the data and information he could possibly get hold of with his scribes. He builds a library in the monastery. And that means he collects all the knowledge about the past until now to then force people to accept it, which is the amor fati. That's the will to intelligence. But the other part of the will to power is the will to transcendence. And the will to transcendence is not with the priest. The will to transcendence is with the chief. It's with the pathos. You feel that you want to get ahead. You feel that you want to move. You feel that you want to, if you can, improve on the world and personify the event that changes history forever. The priest points to the chief and projects the will to transcendence onto the chief. And that's exactly what it means to go to war. To go to war is not to defend yourself. That's pacifist rubbish. To go to war means that you want to expand. While you're at it, why don't you conquer territory of the tribe you're fighting? There's a will to expansion involved in that. And that will to expansion is ultimately the will to transcendence. So if you think about will to power, Nietzsche's discussed these two different wills that should be kept separate. And if you keep them separate, you get the two-headed phallus, and you get the proper imperial construction, like the Persians did, and their empire lasted for 2,200 years, not for 6 years like the Egyptian one. Whilst the Egyptians and the Chinese made mistakes, they went for the one phallus. The Persians went for the split phallus. So did the Jews. And by going for the two-headed phallus, you can point all the way forward to the U.S. Constitution, its brilliance.
Right.
The U.S. Constitution is, again, the triad. The president is the chief. The Congress, they dictate law, priest.
Good point.
And the Supreme Court is matriarchal. The Supreme Court is essentially feminine. It holds the other two guys responsible for what they promised so that they deliver on the protection and the provision. Otherwise, they're nothing.
Wow. And then you have this sort of idea. I think that's what happened with Rome. Is Rome was said when Cicero was consul, they had this constitution, they had the republic going, and then Caesar's like he was the high priest, he was Pontifex Maximus. That was his role, but he decided I could do it all. So he sort of he has that civil war. Pompey was supposed to be the military guy, but they have the civil. Caesar takes over. He creates a very successful empire, but it ends with Nero, a crazy, whacked out man who is like, we can have a whole episode on Nero. So you can see how quick that's within 100 years is done. And then they have to start over with Vespasian, a new Flavian era. And then it's all these different eras. But like you look at the Persians, it's just like straight sailing for like 1,000 years. Just like everything's normal.
Yeah, the Hasar, the original word for the 1,000-year Reich, is Persian.
Wow.
Even Nietzsche uses. I mean, Nietzsche was well informed with the Persians. He didn't pick the character Zoroaster from out of nothing. There are striking similarities between the historical Zoroaster and the Nietzschean Zoroaster. Absolutely. And since I converted to Zoroastrianism in 1992, and every Zoroaster I met who read Also Sprach Zarathustra basically says, yeah, it's just the German 19th century version of our guy. Very same questions. Zoroaster, though the original Zoroaster was not alone. The way that the Nietzschean Zoroaster is, he had his friend Vishtaspa, and his friend Vishtaspa was king, and they isolated themselves for years to try to figure out how they could build their religion that could hold an empire together. And that became Zoroastrianism. And then they discovered that they could have a court religion with a court language and therefore run an empire, and then basically allow anybody below that level to do whatever they pleased. That is why the beginning of universal human rights starts with Cyrus the Great conquering Babylon in 539 before Christ, shocking the Babylonians by not boiling their children in oil, by declaring you're going to be around and you're going to stay. Actually, you're going to be better at being Babylonians. You don't worship Marduk well enough. So we're going to sponsor you to build a better Marduk temple so you can be more Mardukians than you've ever been. And then they basically found the Hebrews, which was an Egyptian sect that were trading in Babylon and were happy doing that. And they claimed to have some kind of origin in Palestine. And the Persians told them, here's money, go off back to Jerusalem and build your second temple. And we sponsor it. So we can have like a dream nation within the empire that declares the system works. And they loved the Hebrews because the Hebrews also had the two-headed phallus within their own local religion.
They call him the
or at least
Messiah.
absorb it. Yeah.
Call him the Messiah for that. Cyrus. He's
Yeah,
the
he was. Cyrus the Great is the only Messiah who was not Hebrew in the Hebrew religion.
right. And he's the only
Now
person
you
in the
see,
Old Testament. He's the only person in the Old Testament who's called my Messiah, not just a Messiah.
yeah. So there is a Persian-Hebrew axis that I'm adamant about is the beginning of the West. But because he deviated from the Persian-Hebrew axis through Islamic Christianity, and we have to deal finally with Islamic Christianity, will both be secularized in the next 100 years and go through, they will go through supernova stages too, which is called fundamentalism. That's when a religion blows up into bloody violence because it doesn't believe itself any longer.
Let me ask you this.
Yeah.
Because Nietzsche's big on talk when he like birth of tragedy and some of his other stuff, early stuff, where he gets into this whole how important art is. And I noticed with Christianity, as it progressed and became this fundamentalist thing, Islam rises in the 6th, 7th century. But at the same time as Islam's rising up, Christianity is going through a phase of iconoclasm where they don't no longer want you to have images of Jesus. That's wrong. So they lose this art thing. This art thing is just erased from the world. What happens when you take away art from the equation?
Well, you can, obviously, because you can take away the tantra from a culture. So we talked about it the last time, but the beauty of the Silk Road Triad is they don't ban anything because you can't. If you try to ban something humans are interested in, all they'll do is that they'll do it somewhere secret, and then it becomes a pressure cooker, and then it blows up.
Right.
And that's exactly what has happened in Islamic and Christian history all over again and again. So what you try to do in the tantric traditions is that you first practice a sutra. You have a religion of the people that works. And sutra is fundamentally that which works. So any narrative that makes people love their children and stay together as a tribe is a sutra. And the sutra must work first. But if the sutra works, you then have what we call the barred absolute. A barred, like B-A-R-R-E-D, a barred absolute. Behind the barred absolute, which is barred to you, as long as you're just anybody, even to you as an adult. But it's a bit like you go from child to adult in the phallic intrusion and the whole phallic process, right? And then when you're an adult, to become a wise adult or just being an adult are two different things. So the step from the sutra to the tantra is the step from being an adult and being an honorable member of the tribe and doing your job and being a father or mother, whatever you like. But if you have the inclination towards it, the talent for it and the psyche for it, you might get invited to go into the tantric realm. And the tantric realm is where you do all those things that Islamic Christianity calls sin. Right? So there's a realm where you can do that. Paganism had the barred absolute. It obviously, we even call it in our work, we take the word from the Greeks. We call it, if you have the law, the sutric law in the world outside the temple, inside the temple, there's a totally different law. This law we call the Aditonology, coming from the Greek word aditon, which is the inner sanctum of the temple. So paganism, Judaism, Zoroastrianism, Buddhism, Taoism, all practice this idea of the barred absolute. And the tantric realm, which is inside the temple or inside the monastery, where law is dissipates, and there's a totally different law that's valid in there that you must not know about if you're outside of it.
Yeah.
But first, the sutra must work. So the priest goes out and declares the narrative that makes people love their children, keep the tribe together, and go to war when necessary. And then he declares his love towards the chief or the king. You must follow the king. I'm going to stay here at the temple, but the king is going to lead you into battle. I'm staying here with the women and children. The king goes into battle. He transcends. He expands. And that's what you need to do. You have to have that force inside of you, the pathical force and that urge to fight. You have to have that. And if you have that as a man, you can go to war with the king. And that's a sutric realm. The tantric realm is then inside the temple. And here's when you handle all the forces of the world that you must not have in the sutric realm. You say, no, you can't do that here, you can't do that here, you can't have that here, but we can bring that inside the aditon, into the aditon, and then we can then have an aditonology, which is a teaching on the actual truth. So the tantric realm is the realm of the incessant pursuit of truth. Remember, this is totally different than the Sutric realm, which is the incessant pursuit of keeping the tribe together in loving harmony. You see how different that is? You have two totally different missions as a priest. There's a public priest whose job is just to keep the entire congregation, the Ummah, the synagogue, the people, the Anjuman, Sangha and Buddhism, to keep them all together. This is the beauty of religion, to keep them all together. The religare of religion is that. But once you walk inside into the Aditon, then there's a whole different ballgame. And that tantric realm is, of course, where you do the psychedelics and, you do the sex beyond sex and you do your psychoanalysis, to be honest about it. It's the incessant pursuit of truth. It's your spiritual journey. It's your journey beyond adulthood towards the sage. That's what you do there. That is eliminated in Christianity, Islam, because the price you pay when you declare there's only one phallus is the price you pay is that you kill the tantra, the possibility for tantra. And anything that reminds people of the other side just banned is then banned outright and called sin. And then you get the creation myth and the Garden of Eden and eating the forbidden fruit and the beginning of all horrors. But in reality, if you're agnostic like me and you, then you realize that eating the forbidden fruit was the greatest victory ever. This is the fundamental difference between Zoroastrianism and Christianity, is that in Zoroastrianism, eating the forbidden fruit was the greatest victory ever.
Right.
It was the beginning towards human divinity. And that journey was still part of that journey. Whereas when you go from Zoroastrianism over to Christianity, no, eating the forbidden fruit was a sin. It's been downwards ever since. And because Christ died on the cross, we got a unique chance to declare repentance from our sins and basically cut our dicks and pussies off and then become like holy saints and become Christians and go to heaven where nobody ever fucks.
And, it reminds me of a famous story of in Alexandria, Egypt, during that little 50, 60-year gap between Constantine and Theodosius, when Constantine just legalized Christianity, didn't make it the state religion, just threw it in the mix. Where Theodosius is what he's like, no more anything besides Christianity. But in between that time, in Egypt, they had the Serapeum, the famous temple of Serapis, and inside so when the Christians took it over, here's the story now. The Christians took this temple over, and when they went inside the innermost sanctum, the inner mysteries, the holy of holies, if you will, what do they find there? They found a bunch of dicks, a bunch of phalluses. And they're like, what is going on? These people are so wicked. They just don't understand that this is the mysteries. What else would you have in there, right?
You can go to Göbekli Tepe and study warrior culture. It's just dicks everywhere.
Right.
And if there's any there is a better one called Cybele to remind you that women can get upset or something like that. But that's all there's to it, right? And besides that, there's just dick worship. There's just phallus worship everywhere. Warrior culture is essentially phallus worship. And that's why I think what happens with civilization, what the Persians managed to do, was to contain the phallus worship and precisely put it inside the Aditonology. What they did was that they had two religions inside the religion. You've had wonderful conversations with Jason Reza Giordani here on your show, and he and I have our differences, like they can be personal even, but he's a great speculative historian.
Right.
And I think what he and I agree is that the secret here is that the two religions eventually within Zoroastrianism that took these roles were Mithraism, which replaced warrior culture and became its own religion within the religion. So the warrior culture started to serve the empire. And then they had Zoroastrianism, which is the religion of the priests. And Zoroastrianism ultimately is that there is no other god but time. And time is a genderless monster that doesn't care about human beings. So you as priest must care about the people. So the people cannot talk directly to God in any way whatsoever. That's like the ridiculous fantasy of Islam and Christianity that would ever be a direct connection between the believers and God. It's just ridiculous. It's like when nobody else likes you on Instagram, at least God gives you a like.
Yeah, Judaism doesn't have that.
No. It's much more problematizing. What the great thing with Judaism is that it can cover all these different aspects, but it does so dialectically as discourse within Judaism. Judaism is like a huge fight inside the religion, but they're always united against the enemy outside, which you can afford if you're a nation.
Right.
You cannot afford that, though, if you're an empire. That's why Judaism cannot become an imperial religion. It cannot become imperial because an imperial religion must include many different discourses on different levels. But in Zoroastrianism, you get like a Moses and Aaron version inside the religion. And that's, of course, the Moses version would that be Zurvanism. The ultimate truth is that the priest must die before he entered the promised land. And then he will show everybody that the whole point was the journey. The whole narrative was there. It was a myth, but it was there to move you. And it did. It did its job. And here's another myth. You must now go into the promised land led by the chief, Aaron, and he'll walk into the promised land, then he'll die. And then whatever you guys do, be smart now and create a system that works, right? Because you arrived in the promised land. So that's another paradigm. You walked into the new age, and you are the winners because you left Egypt and walked into the new, and therefore you establish a new civilization, which is totally different from the Egyptian one. So the two-headed phallus in Zoroastrianism is Zurvanism and Mithraism. And that's how they were clearly defined. And then you have the Anahita worship, you have the worship of the matriarch everywhere. That according to Zoroaster Vishtaspa, who's the priest and the king, who rule the empire together and become the first Mobed and Mobed, Zoroaster, and the first Shah and Shah, the first priest of the priests and the first king of the kings becomes Vishtaspa. And they're successful. They just wait years and years and years before they establish the first Persian empire. And that's 1700 before Christ. Later, Akhenaten creates a parody of it in Egypt, the way China today is a parody of America. Instead of having a constitution, instead of having split power, and create a sustainable imperial system with universal human rights that are protected. So you can have tons of creativity coming out of that system that sustains the system. And basically the empire just taxes the system and keeps the infrastructure running. And the priest makes sure that all the religions keep away from each other. And there is a superior faith that keeps the empire together. Instead of doing that, the Egyptians went for, one boy fair at the top called Akhenaten. And Akhenaten decided to build a new capital and took every soldier out of the army and basically became a pacifist and made them all work on his new capital. So when the Syrians arrived in Egypt, they found no resistance.
Right.
They were like shocked. They're not even fighting against us. They're so obsessed with worshiping their king, who's then worshiping the sun. So the king worships the sun, and everybody else has to worship the king. It's just Stalinism.
Yeah.
It was quite beautiful and fascinating, but it didn't work. And of course, then he inbred an incest kid called Tutankhamun who stayed for a few years until the priest finally said, "Oh, let's get rid of this idea. Paganism is way better than totalitarianism." So at least the Egyptians understood that paganism is better than Stalinism,
they hated
and
it.
got rid of Tutankhamun, reinstalled paganism in Egypt.
They reversed it within a couple of years after.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is the problem with China today, is that the Chinese always say that they're Confucians during the daytime and the Taoists in the evening. Okay, that's a bit like Westerners saying that we follow the state during the day and then we go to church at night and we keep the two worlds separate. The problem is that that's a dualist worldview. The problem is they're not supposed to be kept separate. They're supposed to be separate expertises, to be separate domains, to be the ultimate knowledge in one domain, and to be, transcendence and the willingness to build, have pathos in the other realm. And the two must be combined. Otherwise, they just become two parodies of each other. And so Taoism becomes in China a parody of the pathos because it tries to take the place of the logos. Confucianism becomes a parody of the logos because it tries to take the place of the pathos. None of them really work, not in the long run. And China, therefore, goes towards these constant bloody conflicts when China falls apart again and again and again, exactly like the Christian and the Muslim worlds do too. And I would say that they're going to create a sustainable peace, working from the US Constitution and its roots through the French, and the French all the way back to the Persians. It is to split power in the Constitution from the very beginning that you build the new paradigm. And the way to do that is to separate the logos, the pathos, and the mythos and realize these are three different truths. Each one of these truths are desperately needed. They must not be misunderstood for one another. And the only way you could possibly play with them and try to compare them is through dialectics. But dialectics can only arrive at a very temporary position before it implodes again through its inner dichotomies and conflicts. And therefore, you have to go back to the logos, pathos, and the mythos constantly.
Yeah. Let me ask you something. I'm curious to hear what you think about this. Because when you look back in history, when you look back at, let's say, the 16th century, Islam is taking over Constantinople. You have the Holy Roman Empire in Europe, and they're going down. It seems like there's just fundamentalism everywhere. Dark. The history is looking like dark, and then all of a sudden, something happens, and you get enlightenment. My theory is the Renaissance sort of led up to that, sort of this idea of bringing back the artwork of the Greeks and the Persians, sort of led to the mind being fixed. What is your opinion? What do you think happened that the West sort of woke up from this nightmare of fundamentalism?
Two things. The weakness of Christianity made it possible. Christianity itself put Europe into 1,000 years of sleep. It wasn't a very impressive hussar, right? And, eventually you got Christian emperors, and then Christianity didn't stay the church separate from the state. He tried to conquer both church and state. They tried to do so with a basically pacifist agenda. The Christian world was shocked when Islam arrived. Islam was created in Persia, not in Arabia. Muhammad couldn't even read and write. It's clear that Solomon the Persian wrote the Quran.
Yep.
It was written in Persian parallel with Arabic. I think Giordani agrees with me strongly. Even Tom Holland does so. When you look at the beginning of Islam, it's hidden in mystery. It's not so much mysterious as the fact there was this really pathical guerrilla leader called Muhammad coming out of the Arab Peninsula, and you basically put weapons into the hands of the Arabs. And the Persian Empire was incredibly weak in the 7th century due to a plague. It was a massive plague that killed almost half the population of the Persian Empire. They'd also been at the very costly war with Byzance. Ctesiphon and Byzance were the two. They were the Beijing and the Washington of the time, and they were constant warfare with each other. So there's been this territorial conflict between Persia and the Eastern Roman Empire, and they were both exhausted, totally exhausted. And then within the Persian Empire, there were conflicts between different noble families. There was also theological conflicts. Mostak had occurred in the 6th century. He was eventually killed. But Mostak was the precursor to Rousseau and eventually to, all these fantastic myths about, being able to create paradise on earth. Mostak was a heavy dualist in this sense. Like he said that we can create heaven on earth. All the worst communist atrocities in the 20th century point back to Mostak. But Mostak was a guy who Muhammad revered. Right? So Mostakism did return in the 7th century as Islam. The origin of Mohammedism is in Mostak. The origin of socialism is in Mostak. The reason why Arabs found it so easily to switch between socialism and Islamism in the 1970s was because they're essentially the same thing. Stalin borrowed his red flag from Mostak.
Yeah.
Mostak has always been a hero of the communists because Mostak was the first real communist. I'd like to be a communist myself, but I'm certainly not a socialist. Let's put it that way. Right?
Yeah. And Van Loon in the 1930s is writing his encyclopedia says communism is not, because he's writing in the 30s. So people are like, what's this communism thing happening? And he's saying communism's not new. Communism has been around.
Communism is tribalism. It's nomodology. It's just like the tribe staying together. And at a certain size, that works. Communism works up to 1,500 people.
That's what the first Christians were trying to do before they became a state religion, when there was just a private Christianity. That's what they were trying to do. They were trying to be communist.
Yeah. So the great idea with the communist idea is when it is a tribe itself. The Persians call that Anjuman. So you're responsible to the Anjuman. That means that the king and the Shah and the Mohammed are responsible towards the Anjuman. The Anjuman is then inherited. It's essentially the synagogue in Judaism. It becomes the mosque or the Ummah in Islam. It becomes the congregation in Christianity. These are the best things with all these religions. It's the understanding of the congregation. And it's a communist utopia on earth. Sometimes preparing for in heaven, sometimes just staying on this planet. Doesn't matter. But these are the best ideas with religion, is to keep the congregation together. Communism then, as it's developed in the 19th century, in the vulgar version of Engels rather than Marx, is the idea that we must force all of society to become this communist utopia. That's not a voluntary exercise any longer. You're forced to belong to it. And Islamism is, I force you to become Muslim. If you don't become Muslim, I kill you. It's not very seductive, is it? so I'm going to force you with the sword to become a Muslim, which means that, then I'm going to say I'm a Muslim not to be killed, but I'm not going to be Muslim anyway. And exactly. A lot of Muslims aren't Muslims precisely for that reason.
Exactly.
they were raped to become Muslims. And, if somebody's raped to become something, they usually don't like it that much, thankfully. So the idea of the two-headed phallus returns here, and it's very, very strong. And you see the pattern of the two-headed phallus and the responsibility to the matriarch is what returns to the congregation. That form of communism, I have no problem with whatsoever. But if communism is instated through a state monopoly called socialism, like under Stalinism, then I'm certainly against it. We've seen the disaster coming out of it. And it was a disaster already in ancient Egypt, and it's going to be a disaster in communist China again.
Yeah.
And that's the problem with the belief in the single phallus, right?
Yeah. I want to ask you this too, because the idea of communism, and it's like, if we can imagine a communism that worked. Anybody can imagine a communism. It's just, you just got to imagine it. Now, that's sort of an inevitable ending if you think about it, because we can go the whole free market thing, and everybody just kind of does their own thing. We're just all moving around. But if we really want to go to the next step as a civilization, as humanity, the communism thing's sort of inevitable. People are going to hate this in the comments. What do you think about that?
The problem is that what the Persians and the Hebrews spent so much time thinking, and later inspired the Chinese to do the same thing, the Europeans sloppily looked it over, was empire and nation theory. Empire and nation are the only two formats of social organization that are larger than tribe. We were shaped tribally. That's why my philosophy, John Sedekist, returns to tribe, tribe, tribe. Individuals don't exist. The collective doesn't exist. What exists is tribe. And it's thankfully something in between individual and collective, where you feel the responsibility towards the other participants. You might even be willing to die for them, sacrifice yourself for tribe, because tribe is bigger than you. Tribe is a project that's bigger than the subject. Okay? So women die in childbirth and are willing to sacrifice themselves because of the tribe. Men die in the battlefield or hunting because they're willing to sacrifice themselves for the benefit of the tribe. This is tribal. The problem is that nothing in our genes, in any way whatsoever, has any loyalty beyond tribal size. Now, the Hebrews and the Persians realized that with a fast increase in population size, due to the success of agriculture, due eventually to the success also of industrialization, we had much larger populations to care on this planet, and we're now 8 billion people. We're 8 billion tribal people who have no loyalty beyond tribe itself. That means the Persians and the Hebrews realized that if you have a larger system than tribe size, you must have some kind of state. And that state has to have enormous powers that are still limited. And this is where the role of organized religion comes into the picture, because organized religion is perfect to match the organized state. So if the state has the entire imperial population under its control, the religions within the empire can then go to tribal and keep the tribal size working. And then you have to spend a lot less resources on policing, which is controlling inside the empire, inside the nation, the population bigger than tribe. As soon as you operate with larger than tribe size, for example, in a modern city, you need policing, because loyalty towards your neighbor will diminish towards nothing, because your loyalty will always be towards your family, your clan, your tribe, and nothing beyond that. And that's why trade works and is necessary. That's why infrastructure is necessary. But the point here is separating the state and the church, which is fundamentally the Persian idea, by keeping the two-headed phallus and institutionalize the two-headed phallus, which is state and church, is that the state, which is empire nation, is then run policing the inside and having military defense towards the outside. Because the outside is going to also be full of attempts at larger systems than tribe. So essentially, civilization is the attempt to create and organize larger populations than the tribe. And we're still struggling with it, and why I think it's impossible to go beyond that, because we haven't genetically changed in the last 5,000 years. We're still tribal. I still think that all these ideas about having well-run local communities and allow human beings to be local is humane and will work. But when Jan Söderqvist and I wrote the book, The Global Empire, 20 years ago, please remember, we knew the title would be widely misunderstood. It's not a human global empire we're talking about. We're talking about the Persian Empire now going global through technology. It's a technological empire. What we're preparing ourselves for is that the AI will not know any borders. The AI will be planetary in scope because the AI can adjust itself to become planetary and serve planetary interests. It's perfectly feasible to ask the AI to solve the climate change problem, if that's a problem, for example. I mean, it's perfectly feasible that we organize the AI in such a way that that's what it focuses on. So the AI would then dictate the law that says, like, if you do that or do that, you hurt the climate, and therefore you can't do it. Or you can only do it this price or this cost.
Right.
So the problem has to be limited to somewhere else. So capitalism is actually a wonderful system that's just incomplete.
Right.
We need capitalism plus. And we need capitalism plus that is exploitative rather than exploitative. And if it's exploitative, meaning that you could do anything you like with the resource as long as you put it back where you started, where you picked it from. Any child can understand that. What we did with Christianity and Islam was that with an exploitative mindset. Christianity and Islam takes no responsibility for the planet because this planet's gonna go anyway.
Exactly. This world's
the
evil.
New Jerusalem's gonna come and everybody's going to the afterlife. There's a reason why Christianity and Islam were the two religions of plundering the earth.
Yeah.
Because they had the afterlife.
Jesus said, don't take any thought for tomorrow. They're like, don't even raise up anything in this world. Raise up riches in heaven. Like
Exactly.
that mindset is horrible for long-term society. Horrible.
If you want to have an ecology, you go to Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism declared 3,700 years ago that for an empire to be sustainable, it must be organized in such a way that it doesn't exploit its resources. Therefore, the Zoroastrians banned human sacrifice, they banned animal sacrifice, and they banned slavery. So that happened already 3,700 years ago, long before the European Enlightenment. The European Enlightenment, as you said, really is about the Renaissance. And here's the point. The weakness of Christianity enabled the Renaissance, and then the printing press came along. And when the printing press came along, a small artistic movement, the Renaissance, moved into a much larger movement of ideas called the Enlightenment. And that's the brilliance of the West and of Europe. Europe happened and was successful as civilization despite or in defiance of Christianity. It was its phallic rebellion against the phallus. It was its rebellion against Christianity, which created two further Jewish religions called nationalism and capitalism. The funny thing with Europe is that all our three religions are Jewish by origin. No wonder we go anti-Semitic and feel inferior to the Jews, because both Christianity and nationalism and capitalism are Jewish innovations.
Wow.
But nationalism and capitalism worked. But the problem was when you look at
all these anti-Semites are hating themselves in a way.
Yes, that's why it's not racism. I'm adamant about this. Anti-Semitism is totally different from racism. Anti-Semitism is the exact opposite of racism. It's not hating somebody who despise and feel superior to. This is hating somebody who somehow is superior to you and succeeds where you fail. And the hatred towards the Japanese in East Asia is on a par with the hatred of the Jews in the West.
Yeah.
That's what I find interesting, because the Japanese have the same attitude, like the Jews, that they created a nation that is a religion.
Right.
That's what they did. So the two-headed phallus is there, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment is there, and capitalism arrives in Europe. The problem then, when you look at the colonial empires that Europe created that conquered 3 further continents, is that these empires didn't think about what empire was. They were essentially trading empires that eventually also conquered the lands, in other parts of the world, but they were colonial empires. They were not empires that treated everybody as an equal and they're reporting to the emperor and paying their taxes. No, they were colonial empires in the sense that they plundered their colonies until their colonies eventually, for all the right reasons, went against them. And in that sense, the colonial empires of Europe, first the Portuguese and the Dutch, and then eventually, of course, after the trading empires were gone, these organized, centralized empires, Britain, France, and Germany, came along. And then eventually Russia tried to mimic them by conquering these the same way. And Putin is the last remnant. Putin is the last of the European emperors today. He's dated. That's his problem. He's an old paradigm. That's his problem. So these colonial empires were exploitative. So they exploited and pulled all the resources to central capital. And in the central capital, they basically run as a tyranny. Not with the split phallus. And that's exactly why there wasn't a priest that said, you can't do this in the colonies.
Yeah. Do you think that the Russians right now, with they're sort of leaning on Orthodox Christianity, and do you think they're sort of going towards this boy pharaoh mentality? Do you think? What do you think about them right now? Where would you put?
Yeah, for Putin to go into what he's done in the last 10 years, he's gone religious. He's
Yeah,
absorbed the orthodoxy through the Russian church. And we have to remember the Russian church was always separate from the Greek church. The Russians never learned Greek. They never read a single scripture in Greek. Everything is like Church Slavonic. He was
right.
separated from the Greeks a long time ago. And then what happened is that he basically had an archbishop a patriarch who licks his ass. Not a priest who speaks against him in a separate capital from his own, like the Persians did.
Mm.
And that's why it's eternity. So the question is around this one. Is there an exception? Is there a possible exception among the Persians and the Hebrews to the idea that the priest and the king must always be split, to independently of each other be responsible to the matriarch or the congregation? The matriarch represents communism here. She represents the congregation, right? So
Right.
these two guys have to be responsible to her. The question is there an exception to that? Yeah, there is. There's a temporary solution at the end of the Tsar, when the empire is so decadent that it's about to fall apart and dissolve from the inside and probably be conquered by the enemy and plundered and pillaged. This decline of the civilization must be saved. There must be possibility to save the decline of civilization. In other words, if there is a desperate enough position you're in, and you cannot really wait for the priest and the chief to rule separately, there must be the possibility of a savior. And that institution is Zoroastrianism, who invented it. It's called the Saoshyant, the arrival of the Saoshyant. And thus, Saoshyant is the personification of the event, meaning that there can be a hero who steps in and temporarily is so magnificent, both in body and mind, that it temporarily suspends the two-headed phallus and becomes the single phallus, just for a short period of time, and then he resigns and disappears. That he saves us, right? That's social. That's, of course, inherited by the Jews as the Messiah.
Right. And the soteria in the Greeks, the soter, the savior, which I think gets from that word. It's the same root word, I think.
Yeah, exactly.
Now is this what, so like someone like Caesar, where he says that, oh, I'm just going to be a dictator for a couple of years until I sort all this out. Is that like sort of like the Lord of the Rings of having the ring? Once you get that ring, you're just possessed. Is this like sort of like that? Is it
well the Lord of the Rings is the warning that you have the ring in your hand, then you become the tyrant. And if you're a boy and you desire ultimate power and you're still narcissistic because you still hate the phallus that you don't have yet, as a compensation for not having the phallus yet, you're 11 years old, you still think you're going to be the king of the world. So the priest of the world does not even exist to you, just the king of the world, right? This is the dream of becoming the tyrant. And this is the problem then. The dream of the tyrant is a boyish fantasy. It's infantile. The problem with Christianity and Islam is that they're respectively infantile religions. That's why they have this myth about the afterlife and the resurrection. And no matter what you do, God will forgive you and you will have the entire world to yourself. And there's no end to the amount of power that will be accumulated to you. Please note how this is: I am the only child of the mother, and I will then perform to the mother, and the mother will applaud me. This is pre-sexual. Once you become sexually realized, you must make woman enjoy your dick. And to have her enjoy your dick more than you enjoy fucking her is ultimately the mature adult masculine sexuality. Please note how then the enjoyment is split between you and woman. It's always split, right? It's always split. That's why the only way to achieve it, therefore, to have it split. And that's what you learn when you go through your teenage years and you do the rebellion against the phallus, is that it's not so much that your father turned out not to be a god, but to be human. That reflecting on him, you realize that you're a human too. You cannot be any more than human. And that's when the dream about the one phallus must die. And you must be replaced with the two-headed phallus, because then you look at all men and you look at the two most prominent men you can find. And that's the priest, who's like the boss of knowledge, and there's the chief, who's the boss of power, or just physical power, right? You know, the dick between your legs and the dick in your head are personified. Precisely that is the normal state of things, and it must stay that way. But there is an opening towards the Saoshyant. If a civilization is in such rapid decline that it's about to collapse, you go absolutely desperate. There is the possibility for the priest to step into the role of the chief, or the opposite. And if that happens, you got the Saoshyant, or that's the Messiah. And please note that in Zoroastrianism and Judaism, the Messiah is a very, very rare exception that might never happen, but it's a possibility if it has to happen. And it's strictly a function.
Wow.
Right? So then, of course, once that idea is out there, it has to be there, because otherwise the philosophy is not complete. But if it's out there, then there's the dream that I can be the tyrant, and I'm only responsible to one God that has only one side to him. And the name of that God ultimately is Allah.
Right.
You know, but it could be Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot. This is the problem. The problem with these infantile religions, that they were so popular, they were so easy to spread, either through the word or through weapons, because they promised you the world, and they promised you that you would have everything forever. And it was just simple, real simple, right? Simple symbolism. That's all there's to it. And we now reach the point after Nietzsche, even in the West, we reach the point where this no longer works. And the Chinese will have to arrive at that point too, where this no longer works. We cannot go for the tyrant any longer. We must understand there's nothing more. We're not moralizing against the tyrant. We say the tyrant never works. It's just temporary at best, and then it implodes. If anything drives a civilization towards its extinction, it's being run by a tyrant. Because as soon as you have the mad tyrant, you're done.
It becomes the jealous god who eats its children. The Saturn's eating its children. No, exactly. You can't. I'm in charge. Don't like that's what that becomes. That's that mythos right there.
Yeah. So it's a boy rather than a man.
Yeah.
It's a pre-sexual state that's eternalized. All tyrants always talk about themselves as they represent eternity. You know, you're the dictator of North Korea. You're there eternally. It turns out the sons inherit you as pharaohs of Egypt. The funny thing is how similar North Korea is to ancient Egypt. It is Stalinism again. It's always this idea that the son must inherit the father because the father is still around. And the son will still be around because you can never declare them dead.
Let me ask you this, because I was reading through Dionysus, or the Nonus Dionysica, and it's got this passage about these satyrs, these men with goat legs and horns, and they have giant dicks, and their dicks have minds of their own, and they can talk. What does this mean? Is this sort of an imagery of there being too much phallus, or what do you think? Or do you think this? What do you think? This is something else, maybe?
No. There's a fantasy to that. Jacques Lacan talks about the phallus as that to show your dick in public with a hard-on is for most people obviously an embarrassment and a shock, right? But the point is that when you go into the tantric realm to show your dick, it's the opposite. It's like it has its own personality that's different from your own. Right. Meaning that the dick has a personality. It's not the personality of your mind. You are too. Right? Yeah. And this is because the dick then suddenly with the heart represents the pathos. You really want this pussy, right? It just wants what it wants, right? Whereas the mind operates in a much more speculative mode. You know, the mind is your own local priest, and it's different. So you got a dick in your head, you got a dick between your legs if you're a man, and this is the conflict between the logos and the pathos. The logos is in your mind, and the pathos in your dick. And that's why all these fantasies about the dick talking, it could not say anything else but, I want pussy.
Right, it's just animalistic.
Or I want to kill you. It can only declare openly pathos. The dick cannot say anything else. It has no brain. It just has the balls. You know, it has nothing else. Right. That's what they're doing. But of course, it works as an object of art and as a projection space because it symbolizes the masculine, because it's the only genital organ on the masculine body. The way you can talk about a woman as both being fantastic mamillas. Actually, there are two, so you probably have a twin brother you're fighting with. Mythic rivalry starts with the tit. And then the matrix, which is one, which you come out of and which you will return to when you die. You're met by the matrical gaze, the smiling midwife when you're born, and you probably have a midwife who then says goodbye to you before you die and leave. That's essentially the Freudian understanding of the motivo and the libido. But if you go back to the Roman Empire, the way it still worked, despite having Christian emperors and tyrants and things, and then eventually leading up to Christianity realizing that it would implode unless it became a military religion. So Christianity originally having been pacifist, vegetarian, God knows what else you do if you're mind and hate your body and you're asexual. The Christianity eventually had to turn around. And that's exactly when you started mimicking Islam because Islam was so successful. And that's when you got the Crusades. The Crusades are essentially Christianity trying to mimic. And it's no coincidence that the Crusades started in Northern Europe, far from Rome, where pagan mythology still was strong. And therefore, people started investing in going to warfare to get the Holy Land back, to get Jerusalem back, as if Jerusalem was now taken over by the Christians from the Jews and the Muslims. And this is, of course, where we ended up with Jerusalem, is this constant conflict zone ever since. But if you look at what worked in the Roman Empire, it was the Persian part of the Roman Empire that worked, which was the Mithraic orders. So Mithraism was imported as the old warrior culture, absorbed by agrarian culture. Warrior culture and agrarian culture were in constant warfare with each other. This is essentially Göbekli Tepe versus Mesopotamia for thousands of years. These bloody warfares were only solved when the agrarians agreed that they would share a narrative. So the people of the Euphrates and the people of the Tigris had different gods, but these gods had the shared ancestor, and therefore you could have a larger, deeper god, what we call the root of the phallus. So there was a root of the phallus to the phallus that declared that the phallus actually won in the sense that these people united on the priestly side. After the agrarian culture had discovered this and stopped warring with each other, they were strong enough to start fighting the warrior cultures. This goes on and on through history, all the way up to the Mongol invasions, which is the last attempt by pure warrior culture to attack and plunder and pillage agrarian culture.
Yep.
And it was eventually the Chinese who invented gunpowder. So gunpowder to China did the same thing that the printing press did to Europe. It put a stop to the constant invasions of warrior cultures from the north or the east, and established a permanent agrarian culture that sooner or later had to integrate warrior culture inside the agrarian culture as the military and the police force inside the established permanent settled culture. And the way this happened in the Persian Empire was the warrior culture was given its own role through Mithraism within the Zoroastrian order. Zoroastrianism is split through Ahura and Mazda. Ahura means being, and Mazda means mind. Ahura is on the side of the Shah, Mazda is on the side of the Mobid. And the reason why the religion is called Mazda Yasna is because it sides with the priest as religion, whereas the empire is the Ahura Yasna. When you wave the flag of the Persian Empire, you're on the side of the Ahura Yasna, which you're on the side of being, which is on the side of the chief. But the religion itself is called Mazda Yasna. This is then inherited in the Mithraic orders in the Roman Empire. You know the 7 steps in the Mithraic order.
Mystery, because the mystery cults, they get it all from the Mithraic order, and then you have so the Phoenicians have Adonis, and then you have there's a reason why Orpheus looks exactly like Mithra. When Mithra's slaying the bull, he's got the Phrygian cap, he's got the green cape. Look at Orpheus. He looks exactly the same, and there's a reason why, because the story goes that Pythagoras was a student of Zoroaster. He brought the mysteries back into Italy. He was the first Greek to set up a school in Crotona, Italy. And then you get this Orphism, Pythagoreanism, which trickles all the way through the Platonists, and that's how you get the West. Basically, it all starts in Zoroaster, which is kind of fascinating if you think about it. But I make that point because you mentioned the Mithraic order. The Mithraic order becomes the template for all the mystery cults throughout Egypt, Greece, Rome, Carthage. They're all basically molded to look like the Mithraic order, where you have different mysteries, different levels, different initiates. It's all based on Mithra.
Tantra. This is exactly what Tantra is. And of course, Islam and Christianity banned it outright and declared it sin.
Right.
So the mystery cults are,
even though they themselves are a mystery religion, but yeah.
So Christianity really fundamentally is a religion of the woman and the child.
Right.
It despises the phallus. You know, it's the great mother worship. It is. It always ends up with the mother and the child. Everywhere you look at popular Christianity, it's always the mother and the
That's
child.
why we had that.
Even mother and the child at the cradle or the mother and the child at the cross. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Mother and child, constantly. And that is
Where's
ultimately the
Joseph?
delivery station, for the man. But where is what men are supposed to do? There's a lack in it. The weakness of Christianity also enabled capitalism and nationalism. It enabled the state to prosper, and eventually it became state and market.
That's a good
State
point.
and market are the two things Christianity struggle with all the time, and state and market are precisely these two aspects that later arrive after priest and chief as the hunter and the warrior. The hunter, the warrior becomes state and market. Eventually, the warrior becomes state, and market is the hunter, turning to civilization. So that's the second order, the next axis. And then the third axis is man and woman and sexuality. And the reward of sexuality, which is never harmonious or balanced, is always in chaos, but you have to return to it anyway constantly because your reward system wants you to have that sexual intercourse. And that can only arrive when you sorted out the priest and the chief difference first, which is in the morning. Then in the afternoon is the hunter-warrior difference. And the third one is man and woman. And here's the problem. It's not that hunter and warrior are reflected in priest and chief, but priest and chief division teaches you to divide. So you can divide hunter and warrior. Okay, what happens when you got Tengrism in the Mongol Empire was that you basically taught hunters to become warriors in no time at all. Why is hunter-warrior different? Because killing an animal, killing a human being are different things. Now, if you combine those two into one, you get a warrior who thinks killing humans is killing animals. You get mass slaughter. This is the comparative study you must make between the Mongol Empire and the Nazi occupation of Eastern Europe. Bloody like hell. Because you foster boy soldiers to go out there and kill anything that moves. It make no difference any longer between animals and human beings, which means they kill anything that moves, which means they don't kill either to get food, which is hunting, or kill to win a war, which is killing humans. And they kill mercilessly. They kill anything. They even kill those who are not a threat. When you end up with an empire that cannot feed itself, and you end up with an empire that is hated by all its subordinates. Because the tyranny goes all the way down unless you have the split at the top. Unless the two-headed phallus is there at the top. The guys cannot figure out that hunter and warrior are then different things among us as men, because our leaders are two different types of leaders.
Yeah.
This is what they say. And then after you've done that, you understand the split between man and woman, which comes as the third split. If you understood the two-headed phallus from the very beginning as a man, the logos and pathos are not united, you understand that you and woman are not the same thing. Woman may be united in her mythos, and that's why you love to fuck her, but you will still remain a logos pathos divide until the next morning when you're reminded of it when you see the priest and chief. So this is the two-headed phallus and how it works through all the masculinity. And it's redundant in Christianity, but it was there in the Mithraic orders. So what happened was that the Mithraic orders dominated the Roman Empire all the way from Scotland to Syria. You had Mithraiums everywhere. And every Mithraic had an order where you had 7 steps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Guys love steps, all the way up to level 6 and 7. 6 and 7 were on a par with one another. You put the priest at level 7, but only on a par with the king at level 6. Why were they on a par? Well, to allow the priest to be superior to the king within the Mithraic order, only the sons of the king could inherit the order. And by making it impossible for the priest to aspire towards transcendence, he could aspire towards perfect gnosis.
Wow.
That's what gnosis must be.
Right.
But to do the perfect gnosis, you must then abstain from having children that can inherit the empire. This is inherited strictly from the Persians. The first son of the Shah becomes the next Shah. The second son of the Shah becomes the next Mobed. And none of the children of the Mobed, he doesn't have to be chastity. That's just a parody in Catholicism. He has to go to chastity. No, the priest can have children, but the children of the priest can never have any sort of merit or be part of the nobility. They're left completely outside, right? They can be monks or nuns for all they care, but cannot aspire to become the next priest. A monk does not rise to become the next priest. The next priest is always taken directly from the royal court as a brother of the king himself to make sure they love each other, mutually admire each other. That's what's instituted in the Persian Empire. It's inherited by the Mithraic order. And this is exactly what the secretary and the chairman in any board we ever reminded of are repeated. So the chairman and the secretary repeat in the way that the secretary can have all the power over the knowledge he likes, but he cannot aspire to become the chairman. There's a resistance to ever making the secretary into chairman because it represents perfect mind, whereas the perfect body represented by the chairman. Now, of course, this is inherited in Western culture. It stays as the mystery cults of Western culture. It's called Freemasonry. It came back during the Renaissance and Enlightenment. It was opposed by the Christian church. The Christian church was aggressively against any of these mystery cults.
Absolutely.
Because it is the Western tantra. And the Western tantra luckily survived, and it's shown to its most brilliance during the dictation of the US Constitution, which was, of course, an entirely Freemasonry activity without any involvement from any Christian church. And instead, America decided to go Persian and say, you can have any religion you want, but you must submit yourself to the US Constitution.
This is what I wanted to end on, because you just walked into my next question. Is this United States, the way we have it over here in the United States, and Europe's pretty close to this. I don't know how much I think it was called the Napoleonic Codex, and now it's like code or common law. But anyways, and over here you have your 3-branch system. We talked about it earlier in the show. 3-branch system, and they check each other. Now this is sort of Mithraic in a way, but but the question is, within a constitutional republic, when this 3-branch system, it's working pretty well. What are we missing here? Or do we have it perfect over here? Like what would you say on that? This is the last thing I want to talk about.
What you're missing at the current crisis in America is, for example, what Daniel Schmachtenberger talks about when he mentions the third accelerator. And by the way, I'm saying it right here. I hope he's going to be on your show soon. I'll see you go to talk to him, because I think you'd have wonderful conversations.
He's brilliant.
Schmachtenberger is absolutely brilliant. He's a must listen to. Check him out, whatever you do. We started having conversations, well, publicly. We've known each other for years, and we just realized that Tom and Mark asked, this is Parallax, that why don't you guys talk to each other in public? And then we sort of nervously recorded our first podcast together, because Schmachtenberger and I are so private, so tantric in our conversations that we never had conversations to public before. But, it became a suited conversation, which it must be when you record it and release it in public. But the third attractor talks about is essentially Hegel's constant return to the triad, return to dialectics. It's Jacques Lacan's, the symbolic, the imaginary, and the real. The symbolic is the logos, the imaginary is the mythos, and the real is, of course, the pathos. And this is returned to the US Constitution. What is so striking with America today is America has become a civil war between two parties that have become completely partisan. That strikes America as being very un-American, right? Yeah. And all this talk about a third attractor and getting the triad back is really about, can there please be possibly a third voice? And here's what I think is incredibly important to learn from Hegel. The third voice is not a go-between. The third voice opposes both of the two camps. It rises above the two camps, but it keeps the two camps as competition in debate by honoring the Constitution, saying that you're both now wrong. Maybe the split between the Republican and the Democratic Party was eventually doomed because it didn't reflect the Constitution and its idea of the three. Maybe it was eventually doomed to fall into this opposition between the two. And opposition between the two is at best Taoism, which means it stays away from power, and then Confucianism becomes the third. And at least that works for a while. But in America today, you got opposition between the two, and they're getting increasingly stupid. And I think here you have to deal with the fact that America not only inherited Freemasonry and the Mithraic orders as a superior elite in America, it also inherited Christianity. And Christianity doesn't understand the triad properly. Because it doesn't understand the triad properly, Christianity now goes into a mode where it opposes itself. So you get a secular Christianity fighting whatever is left of a fundamentalist Christianity, and you essentially get the Civil War in America today, where ironically Trump himself, being a cynical nihilist, pretends to lead the fundamentalist Christians.
It's kind of funny when you think about it.
Can you see how desperate this is? Can you see how the fundamentalist Christians in America don't even believe their own religion anymore? And therefore they attack the opposite side with this enormous vengeance. Like, the opposite side must be killed. We must go after them. We must stop the abortions now, whatever. Just like they go absolutely desperate at the high-pitched voice. And the opposition they get is that secular Christianity in America, which has not passed through Christianity and left it, which it should, as it did in Europe and even did in South America. The sort of secular Christianity in America. The problem with the Bidens and the Clintons is that they still pretend to go to church on Sundays. So they're cynical nihilists. They're also pretending to be Christians. The problem with America is that everybody in America is pretending to be Christian, and nobody is a Christian any longer.
Right. They're all publicly Christian or Muslim or something. There's only one Andrew Yang.
They're all Beyonce. They're all showing off their ass, and they're fucking like mad, and they're consuming like the ultimate hedonist, and they still thank God on the record cover. It's just to the outside world, America is like technologically the most advanced society ever. Enormous inspiration when it comes to creativity and entrepreneurship. Thankfully, the savior of capitalism. Whenever you argue against capitalism, the US dollar goes through the roof. It's fantastic in many ways. But the problem with America is its religion is despicable.
I agree.
And what it doesn't realize is that we had a journey from brilliant religion. If technology went up for the last 5,000 years, religion went down. And therefore, you must make a comparative study of the Silk Road Triad and the brilliance of Buddhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, and we can include Judaism on the side too. And the brilliance of those three religions, you must study that and then compare it to what America on its own created in terms of theology in the last 300 years, which I call the Disney World Triad of Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, and finally Scientology.
Wow, that's so
It is so fucking shitty, And at least Scientology is honest about being post-Christian. It basically says, yeah, we believe in the afterlife, and we put it on other planets, and you can go there if you pay for it. And if you pay for it, you could go to fucking Mars and hang out with Tom Cruise in a nightclub forever. At least the Scientologists expose how rotten the idea of the Christian heaven is. This is what Christian heaven is.
That's a good point.
It's hang out with Tom Cruise in a nightclub and fucking Muslim virgins.
That's it.
It's nothing better than that. It's despicably bad. This is how bad religion is. And America, you created the Disney World Triad. It's time for a real religious awakening in America, because if America can go through the religious awakening, then you can hold China responsible for not delivering on getting rid of its tyranny and the idea of its tyranny. And instead, China could develop a triad of Confucianism, Taoism, Buddhism properly, which is what Deng Xiaoping planned for China and Xi Jinping destroyed in 2014. I think you see the problem here, both China and America, and while we're not very impressed with any of them, we say yes to whatever they can achieve. We say no to their fundamental flaws. The fundamental flaw in America is bad religion. Americans must hold each other accountable in theological debate. Go to the bottom. And that's why Jordan Peterson was such a depressing tragedy.
Yeah.
Because he gave in to Christianity and became a cynical nihilist himself.
I couldn't agree more.
When Jordan Peterson said this, one famous one-liner, I don't tell you if I believe in God or not, but I behave as if I believe God exists. He's a cynical nihilist. No, you don't. You're a liar. You figure out whether God exists or not and whether you submit to him or not, and then you act accordingly. If it doesn't exist, you have to live through that, as Nietzsche said. You have to go through the ironic nihilism. You have to go all the way to affirmative nihilism. And you have to declare you enjoy the freedom that God does not exist so you can create a new God.
Right.
That's what America must do.
Yeah.
And this is why we make a comparative study in the next book, in Process between the Silk Road Triad and the Disney World Triad. They should be compared, and America should be ashamed of itself for the lousy, terrible theology it has produced.
Wow. This has been great. Because we can just keep going and down this conversation. This is good stuff. We're gonna have a part 3 coming up, so we're gonna set that up, and I'm not sure when, but we definitely are gonna have it. What do you have coming up soon that you want to let people know about? Any events coming up that people should know about?
Yeah, I'm working on process event with Jan Söderqvist. It's going to come out next year. I'm also working on a book called The Negatology with Kettle Last, which is me training to submit myself to somebody who has enormous willpower. Kettle is fantastic, but
Yeah,
it's like
that's great.
it's like a struggle. We make our struggle in public even. So we do debate all ideas that we explore for the book eventually with other people who are engaged in that conversation. And I think if you pull it off, there's going to be also a book called The Negatology coming out next year, which is to me a whole different way of doing philosophy than the sort of very friendly, amicable writing that we do with Jan Söderqvist.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if one thing I know about you that people might not know is you're engaged in 24/7 discussions and debates and dialogue with people, and if someone doesn't come correct, you're gonna tell them. Like, get the F out of here with that shit. That's some bullshit. And so you're not scared to tell people when they're when they're full of shit, basically.
Yeah. And often I hit it right, but sometimes I also have to back off, because it also makes me angry. Like, oh God, he's so dead wrong. I'm gonna go after daddy and like fight daddy here. And I think, a good priesthood works that way. I tell them this is probably bullshit, and they get angry and then I listen to them. They have their counter argument. And I much prefer in this day and age to be interactive. I think the whole exploration of philosophy is so much more exciting when it's not the professor. Catalast and I have both resigned as professors. We don't want to be in academics. We're clear about that.
Well, it's like,
I'm not a professor. I think we're redundant. The professor's redundant because we're now going to an interactive age. We explore things together, and then I can even learn in the process of teaching.
it's like Diogenes and Plato. You and Cadell are like Diogenes and Plato.
Yeah.
You're the Diogenes.
And I tell you what, I don't know if Cadell agrees, but there's a certain Socrates and Plato aspect of me and Cadell fighting it out in the sense that Plato gets the last word. And I'm not Plato. I've got the Socrates beard. I'm just Socrates.
That's a good point. Yeah.
So, but I don't mind. I think it's really good training for me. And this way I want to honor Cadell for taking on the challenge and see where we end up. We have this one thing we share. Hegel.
Yeah.
Hegel. We might read other things differently, but our reading of Hegel, I think, is identical.
One of the greats.
And we're back with Hegel massively. There's the Enter the Alien anthology, as we talk about as well, which is out. You can get it at Amazon. I've written the foreword about the Hegel event, and then Cadell and all the other guys are writing these fantastic texts. These are all a series of young philosophers who explore Hegel for the times we live in, and they do it fantastically, very creatively. And I think ultimately philosophy is not about being right. Philosophy is about being creative.
Right.
It's about being interesting. A wrong idea that's interesting is way better than the correct idea that's boring.
Nice. That was perfect. That was the perfect thing to end on. And so thanks for coming back on. We'll do this again soon.
Yeah. And keep on digging into the mythos and the origin of the West. You do a great job with that. I love this podcast and I love your work. And see if you can get Daniel on board as well. And keep on doing what you're doing. You're exactly in the right place. You're doing the Nietzschean project properly.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're digging into the origin of the West. What we do together, you and I, in different ways, that we're searching for the root of the phallus. Because unless you get the root of the phallus correctly, you cannot build the new phallus of the new paradigm correctly either.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, you have just attained true gnosis.
You have just attained true gnosis. The demiurge has no power over you.